Hello and welcome to your St. John Narana Midweek message for this week. Getting closer to the end of our series on the Lord's Prayer in our confirmation review. Today's passage is, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." You remember Flip Wilson? And I'm not being flippant here, but Flip Wilson was a wonderful comedian from many, many years ago. Young folks in the audience won't know who I'm talking about, but Flip Wilson was this stand-up comic who did his own television show, and he had a character named Geraldine Jones. Geraldine Jones! And Geraldine Jones was famous for saying, "The devil made me do it." Well, usually that's a cop-out, because it's something that we just did and probably feel bad about. But "the devil made me do it" is a way of wiggling out of our own responsibilities. We are led into temptation usually by our own actions, by our own error, and by our own flaws. The flip side of Flip Wilson's flip comment is, "God made me do it." God put me in this position and I had no choice. Well, that's always untrue. We always have choices. That's the human condition. We make choices, good ones, bad ones. We live with the bad choices and we tend to try to take credit for the good choices. The reality is, much of what we do is simply in reaction. But we do have the power to choose. And God leads us into choices. And God's will is that our choices might be ones that lead to flourishing and joy and community. There is a very strong human temptation to try to blame others. But God is not responsible for our bad choices. God has provided rich, rich resources to us, great gifts, wonderful opportunities, and an abundant, beautiful, glorious world that we all too often take for granted. God's leading is that we follow Christ. And when we do that, we are delivered from evil. When we follow Christ into a way of life that is loving, giving, and forgiving, as we talked about last week. Forgiveness brings healing to relationships and hope to life itself, and joy. When we live in unforgiveness, the trash that we've passed on others most often lands up in our own front yard or even in our bedrooms, much closer than we want them to be. So God's leading is to lead us into wise choices, to resist temptation, to resist the temptation that just floods in upon us from a world of selfishness and materialism, a world that sees things as that which we love and people as things to use. That's not God's way. God leads us into a life of loving one another and using things to do so more effectively. When we live that way, evil is reduced and restrained, and our lives become more joyful and thankful, and we are delivered from great evil.